Sylvia Aki by Winifred Conkling. Part 1. California and Arizona, 1941. Chapter 1. He who doesn't look ahead remains behind. Mexican proverb. Sylvia, Westminster, California. Sylvia Mendez imagined her first day of third grade at Westminster School. She would use her freshly sharpened yellow pencils to write her name in cursive at the top of her worksheets. Her just out of the shoebox black Mary Janes would glide across the polished linoleum of the hallway. At the end of the day, she would come home and her father would hug her and ask, "What'd you learn today?" And she would tell him about her teacher and her classmates and everything else. Sylvia never imagined that the one thing that actually happened even before her first day of school, she was turned away. Summer vacation was nearly over. In the morning, Sylvia was to register for school. She rode with her Aunt Soledad, her two brothers, and her cousins in the back seat of her family's blue Pontiac sedan. Watching orange groves and the fields of lima beans, sugar beets, and asparagus rush by. The flat southern California landscape stretched to the mountains, one farm after another, each a distinct pattern of green stripes. We have a farm, Sylvia thought, for the first time, our very own farm. Sylvia's father had worked as a field hand on other people's farms most of his life, but now things were different. Now her father was the boss. That day, her parents had stayed at home because the irrigation system on the farm needed fixing. She knew it wouldn't last forever. Sylvia's family had leased the asparagus farm from a Japanese family who would someday return. "The school is right up here," Aunt Soledad announced, jolting Sylvia back into the present. They had entered downtown Westminster. A dozen or so small businesses clustered around a couple of main streets. No churches, no movie theaters, no department stores. It was utterly different from busy Santa Ana, where Sylvia had lived before. The car turned onto 17th Street, and they passed a large cream-colored stucco building with fancy arches over the doorways and pretty flower beds in front. The word auditorium was spelled out along the side. She imagined going to assemblies or watching the older kids play sports. Wow, Sylvia thought. Her aunt slowed the car and pulled into the parking lot. "Is that it?" Sylvia whispered to her cousin Virginia. "That's our new school?" "I guess so," Virginia whispered back. Sylvia had never seen a school like it. Cypress trees and other evergreens surrounded the buildings like tall guards, reminding her of a park and making the place look important. "Look," Sylvia cried, pointing at the playground. "Real monkey bars." Her old school in Santa Ana didn't have any playground equipment, not even a rope string on a tree limb. She pictured herself climbing the ladder and swinging from rung to rung, her legs dangling free beneath her. "I'm going to go all the way across without dropping," said Sylvia's younger brother, Jerome. "I'm going to go all the way across and back again," boasted her other younger brother, Gonzalo Jr. "Come on," Aunt Soledad urged. "There will be time for that later." Sylvia and the boys followed Aunt Soledad and their two cousins into the front office. Inside, the school secretary sat behind her desk, pecking away at a typewriter. Sylvia watched, fascinated, as the women's long, pale fingers tap-danced over the typewriter keys, clickety-clacking out words with a steady beat. A fan perched on a table across the room swept back and forth, stirring the woman's light brown hair with every pass. She continued typing without even glancing at the newcomers. "How may I help you?" "I'm Soledad Vidauri," said Sylvia's aunt, "and I would like to register these children for school." The secretary fished the enrollment papers out of a desk drawer and handed them to Aunt Soledad. She went back to her typing. While Aunt Soledad filled out the forms, Sylvia peered out the office door and down the long hallway, its polished floors shining like the surface of a still pond. Across the hall there was a table with a big stack of brand-new textbooks. Sylvia stepped out, picked up one of the books, and read the title, Down the Road. It had a bright yellow cover showing a mother duck followed by her 5 little ducklings. Sylvia had never held a new textbook before. She closed her eyes and imagined gently opening a book for the very first time, smelling the newness, running her palm over each smooth page, and turning the crisp corners with the tips of her fingers. What would it be like to be the first one to read that book? A book that wasn't worn and soiled by countless other fingers. Reluctantly, she set down the textbook and returned to the office just as Aunt Soledad completed the first set of papers. "Excuse me, ma'am," Aunt Soledad said to the secretary. "May I have several more forms for my brother's children?" The woman stopped typing again. She looked at Sylvia and her brothers as if noticing them for the first time. "Are these your children?" "No," Aunt Soledad said. "These two are mine." She rested one hand on Alice's shoulder and the other on Virginia's. "They'll be entering third and fourth grade." Sylvia looked at her cousins. They had fair skin and wore their long, wavy brown hair in tight curls tied back from their faces with navy ribbons. "These are my brother's children," Aunt Soledad said, gesturing at Sylvia and her brothers, all three alike with warm brown skin, dark hair, and dark eyes. Jerome and Gonzalo had broad, friendly smiles and neatly combed hair. Sylvia wore her hair in 2 straight braids with a red bow pinned above her right ear. She tried to smile too, but something in the way the woman was looking at them made her uneasy. "What are their names?" the secretary asked with a sigh. "Mendez, Sylvia, Gonzalo Jr., and Jerome." The woman held up her hand to interrupt Sylvia's aunt. "The Mendez children will need to register at Hoover School, the Mexican school." "What? No," Aunt Soledad objected. "I want all of the children in the same school. Both families live in Westminster." "Mexican children go to the Mexican school," the woman insisted. "But we live here," Aunt Soledad repeated. "All of us, together." Sylvia and her family lived in the main house on the farm, while Aunt Soledad and her family lived in one of the smaller caretakers' houses. "I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do about the rules," the woman said, noisily shutting the desk drawer. "No, you see, the children are cousins," Aunt Soledad tried again. Her voice remained calm, though Sylvia could see an angry tightening at the corners of her mouth. "The Mendez children will need to go to the Mexican school." "But I can't do anything about it," the secretary said impatiently. "Do you want to register your two or not?" Sylvia watched her aunt. Will she listen to the secretary and send us to a different school? Aunt Soledad drew in a breath, long and deep, but then she paused and let her breath escape with a sigh. "No," Aunt Soledad said firmly. "No, I do not want to register my girls." Sylvia had expected her aunt to let out a furious rush of angry words, but now she realized that those few words were just enough. Aunt Soledad had nothing more to say. She simply turned around and marched through the open doorway. Sylvia and the other children followed behind her in a single file. "We're like the ducklings on the cover of those new textbooks," Sylvia realized. "The ones I won't ever get a chance to read." On the way home, Aunt Soledad didn't speak. She clutched the steering wheel fiercely and glared at the road. Virginia and Gonzalo rode in the front seat, and Sylvia was squeezed between Jerome and Alice in the back, their forearms touching. Sylvia looked down at her hands, her skin the color of dark caramel, and then she looked at Alice's hands, which reminded her more of dulce de leche, milk candy, lighter, creamier, paler than her own. Is this why they would take Alice and Virginia but not me? She wondered. Is it because my skin is too brown? Is this why me and my brothers were told to go to the Mexican school? But I'm not even Mexican. I'm American. What's my father going to say about this? Sylvia gazed out the window. It was so unfair to everyone. Her mother was an American citizen from Puerto Rico. Her father had come from Mexico as a little boy, but he had become a United States citizen and worked hard all his life. How many times had her father told her that he wanted her to get the best education possible, to be the first in the family to finish high school, to go to college? She could hear his voice. "I want you to have every opportunity I never had." Her father would be so disappointed if she didn't go to Westminster School. Maybe Hoover School would be just as good as Westminster School. Maybe going to Westminster School doesn't really matter. Maybe my father won't be disappointed. But she couldn't help thinking about the monkey bars and the new textbooks, and her heart sank. She guessed there would be no monkey bars and no new textbooks at Hoover School. It would be like her old school in Santa Ana. Second hand, second best. We're being treated like second best people, she thought bitterly. A few minutes later, they turned off the main road and onto the long driveway with asparagus fields on the other side. The farm buildings consisted of the main house, a bunkhouse, and 3 other smaller houses behind it, and a large barn with an open packing house beside it. Aunt Soledad made a dramatic entrance. She braked hard and fast, bringing the Pontiac to a sudden stop. She yanked the key out of the ignition, slammed the car door, and stormed off toward the packing house. "Gonzalo!" she called, looking for her brother. "Gonzalo!" Sylvia and the others trailed Aunt Soledad. The afternoon sun fell in dusty streaks, highlighting crates of freshly picked asparagus. The air smelled of rich, wet soil. A couple of brown and white hens wandered past, pecking at the ground in sudden jerks. Sylvia's father looked up from his conversation with several packers. "What's the matter?" he asked his sister. "The kids, they can't go to that school," Aunt Soledad said in a rush. "The secretary said that the kids have to go to Hoover School because they're Mexican." Aunt Soledad didn't mention right away that Alice and Virginia could have enrolled at Westminster. Maybe she's trying not to embarrass her family, Sylvia thought. "That can't be right," he said. "Westminster's the closest school." "I know," Aunt Soledad said, "but they're supposed to go to that school for Mexican children." To Sylvia's surprise, her father didn't seem upset. He smiled and rested his hand on Aunt Soledad's shoulder. "Don't worry. There must be a mistake. I'll take care of it tomorrow." Sylvia relaxed. She had every faith that her father would be able to set things right. Later that afternoon, Sylvia went to her room to put away the navy jumper and new school shoes her mother had bought her. "Sylvia?" Her mother pushed open the bedroom door with a dish towel in one hand, taking a break from fixing dinner for the farm workers. "Your father told me what happened when you went to register for the school." She studied Sylvia's face carefully. "Yeah, Aunt Soledad was pretty angry," said Sylvia. "I am too." "Mom," Sylvia began, "do you think we'll be able to go to Westminster School?" "I don't see why not," Sylvia's mother answered. "That's the closest school." "But the lady at the school said we have to go to a separate school for Mexicans next to the barrio." "So," said her mother, "we don't live in the barrio." "I know. Your father will handle it." The oven timer sounded in the kitchen. "The cornbread is ready," Sylvia's mother said. "Do you want your door open or closed?" "Open is fine." "Don't worry so much. It will all work out. You'll see." Then her mother left. Sylvia turned back to her closet. She picked up the box her new shoes had come in and pushed it onto the high shelf in her closet. Instead of sliding in completely, the box stopped 3/4 of the way back. She shoved harder, but it was blocked by something at the back of the shelf, something she couldn't see. Sylvia dragged the ladder back chair from her desk over to the closet and climbed onto it. She reached up, moved the shoebox aside, and stretched out her hand, running it back and forth over the shelf. She felt something, but accidentally nudged it just beyond her grasp. She stood on her tiptoes and stretched again. This time, she was able to grab the corner of a poster or paper of some kind. She dragged the paper, and whatever was resting on top of it, to the edge of the shelf. A sprinkling of dust showered down on her. "Ugh," Sylvia cried, wiping her face with her arm. She reached up again and pulled down her treasure, a delicate Japanese doll and a photograph. Sylvia stepped down and set the photograph on her bed. She shook the dust from the doll and blew it away as well as she could. The doll had black hair, blunt cut at the shoulders, with straight bangs across her forehead. She wore a shimmering red satin robe made of fabric as nice as that in her mother's best dress. Why would someone leave a doll like this behind? Sylvia wondered. Did someone forget it? Did someone leave it here for me to play with? "Your name is Keiko," Sylvia told the doll. She didn't have any Japanese friends, but she had heard the name before. Sylvia placed Keiko on her pillow next to the Mexican doll her mother had given her. Carmencita wore a 3-tiered skirt made of pink, turquoise, and purple cotton, edged with zigzag trim in green and yellow. "Carmencita, meet Keiko," Sylvia said. "Keiko, this is Carmencita." She leaned the 2 dolls against her pillow. Then Sylvia reached for the black and white photograph. 3 rows of children and a young woman, surely their teacher, smiled at the camera. Two girls in the front row held a sign, Westminster School, 3rd grade, Mrs. Howard, 1941-1942. Turning the photo over, Sylvia read the name, Aki Munemitsu, written on the back in shaky cursive. Sylvia peered more closely at the photograph and spotted a girl with almond eyes in the second row. Right away, she guessed. This was Aki's photograph. This was Aki's bedroom. So Keiko must have been Aki's doll before she had to go away. Sylvia knew the Japanese family had been sent away because of the war, which was how her family had been able to lease the farm. After the United States had entered the war against Japan and Germany, all the Japanese along the coast of California had to leave their homes and move inland to inland camps until the war was over. It was sad for them, Sylvia thought. But how lucky for us that we get to live here, even for a little while. Sylvia put the photograph down and looked out the bedroom window at row after row of lacy asparagus plants. The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, painting gold on everything it touched. The farm looked so pretty at that moment. Still, Sylvia could not let go of two important questions. Where is Aki now? And if a Japanese girl like Aki was allowed to go to Westminster School, why can't I?